Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 5th Annual Triton Leaders Conference, and welcome to our discussion on the perspectives on allyship. My name is Sean Harding, and I am a digital engagement and social fundraiser with the annual giving department here at UC San Diego. And I'm really excited to have the chance to moderate this discussion today. Joining us today is a stellar cast of Tritons whose allyship experience spans across multiple generations in industries including consulting, science, tech, and health. Let's give a virtual round of applause for our panelists. First joining us is Adam Burgasser, Haley Erickson Stark, Declan Fleming, and Ayelet Rupin Pham. Thank you for joining us, everybody. As previously discussed throughout the conference, allyship is defined as any person that actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. More importantly, everyone has the ability to be an ally. So today, our panelists will share with you their personal journey with allyship in hopes of inspiring you and how you best can serve as an ally. So without further delay, let's get this conversation started. Panelists, will you please tell me a little bit about yourself? Where do you work? What do you do? Why don't we start with Haley?
Well, good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. I know I need a weekend for sure. My name is Kaylee, she, her pronouns, but my name's too long to fit my pronouns on the end of my Zoom name here. I work in central HR and staff education. And I'm embedded in the VC advancement area. I've been in advancement here at UCSD for almost 4 years. And my background is in staff education, youth development programs, K-12, leadership, job readiness. And I've gone through the Lead Fellow program here at UC San Diego. And allyship and equity, diversity, inclusion is hugely important to the work that I do and to the life that I live.
Adam, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, welcome everyone and happy Friday as well. My name is Adam Burgasser. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm a professor of physics here at UCSD. I've been a faculty member here for the last, I think, 12 years now. And I'm also an alumnus. I was a Muir College class of 1996. So happy to be back and be teaching in the place where I learned so much. I am, by kind of research, I do astronomy. I study different kinds of stars and I look for planets around them. I look for life around those planets. But that's, I would say, one of my hats that I wear here at UCSD. Obviously, teaching is another one. But a very big third part of that is also getting involved in DEI efforts in improving equity and diversity, not just here on this campus, but also much more broadly in my scientific community. So here at UCSD, I'm a UC Lead Fellow, including all of us here. And I've also been in charge of the equity committee in my department. I'm a member of the Black Studies Project Executive Council. And then more broadly, I've served on the chair as the Committee on the Status of Minorities in Astronomy for the American Astronomical Society. And so I'm very interested in figuring out ways of identifying the barriers that students and faculty face in their advancement that are tied to various areas of identity, and just building systems where we can break down those biases and those discrimination practices in our science community and our personal lives as well.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm gonna have to come look at some stars with you. We can you can show me how everything works.
All my stars are
Declan,
invisible.
Okay. Declan, would you go next, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Declan Fleming. I work at Central IT on campus. I've been on campus 20 years. I was at the library for most of my career while I was here running IT there as well. And that's where I actually got involved in allyship. It's kind of weird word to call yourself, but it was just work involved in figuring out why things weren't looking right, why things that should be thought were equal were not, especially in gender and tech. And that's where I focus, and I'll talk more about that later on. Also got quite involved and joined the Chancellor's Council on the Status of Women, which then led me going to lead in 2017. And now I serve on the CFO's Inclusive Excellence Committee as the lead members, part of lead members on that as well too. Like I said, I focus mostly on gender and tech originally, and then through lead and through a lot of lead learning over time, I've learned a lot more about race and just in general, and race and tech as well too, which is actually pretty interesting. So we can talk more about that later on too, if you want to go there as well. So.
Ayelet, can you round us out, please?
I know these are hard acts to follow, but hi everyone, my name is Ayelet Ruthenfam. I'm also a very proud UCSD alum, class of 03, Thurgood Marshall College. I majored in sociology and ethnic studies and then went on elsewhere to get my nursing degree in community health systems nursing. Fortunately, came right back after that, and I've been working at UC San Diego Health for the last almost 12 years in May. I'm the patient education specialist for the UC San Diego Health System, which really means that I'm responsible for putting together all of the resources that we use to teach patients. And so with that really comes a lot of need for looking at how we teach our patients, teaching with a health equity lens, making sure that the language that we use is appropriate for patients so they actually understand what they are supposed to do and how to be their own advocates. So I really took a lot of what I have learned through my UC San Diego education in ethnic studies, and then followed that up with my community health nursing to be where I am today.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be a moderated discussion with a couple questions, but feel free. We'd love for all of you that are here, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat, and I'll try to get to those during and also afterwards. We'll have some time for some moderated Q&A. But thank you all again for joining us. Thank you for those introductions. I'd like to start with just the first question for all of you. What role has allyship played throughout your career? Please feel free to share any personal experiences if you'd like to, of being a benefactor of an ally. Who would like to go first? Anyone?
I'll go ahead and start us off.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So I'll just share just a brief story, both as having been the recipient of allyship, but also what I do as an ally to support others. And one thing I should certainly confess is that issues awareness and cognition and actually effort in addressing issues of DEI was not something that I've done since the very beginning. I wasn't even really cognizant of the very many barriers that women and people of color face in physical sciences. I am a white man. I self-identify as heterosexual. I self-identify as able-bodied. I have embodied all the possible privilege you can have in the scientific community. And it's very easy for those of us in this position to not see these kind of barriers because we simply don't experience them. And so my path really started because of a senior ally who was the chair of our department when I was a faculty member at MIT, who made it his point to bring down a sizable group of faculty and students to the National Society of Black Physicists meeting in 2009 in Nashville, Tennessee. And at that point, I didn't even know there was a National Society of Black Physicists or Hispanic Physicists or any of these other organizations. And it was the first time in my life I had been at a conference where I no longer saw that the majority of people around me were the same identity as me. Now, obviously, in my larger community, that's still mostly the case. We have pretty poor representation in terms of demographic, folks in physical science at large. But here, I finally became aware that that is an issue. That is something that you have to be thoughtful about, because when you're in an environment that you are not like everyone else, it's a very different social experience. And I actually had a wonderful experience in the conference, but I was very cognizant of what I was feeling in my body being in that place. So that act of that, of this senior person to really live out, the objectives he had to get folks like myself who were, at that time I was already a professor, to become aware of the inequities in our community by experiencing what that, these communities at large, was extremely foundational for me to start to get involved in this work and to really, really spend a lot of effort in that. So, to me, that highlights the importance of having senior folks in academia, in industry, in these various communities who, lead by example and who encourage folks who are working with them to really step out of their comfort zone to understand what's happening to, honestly, a huge portion of our researchers in the physical sciences. And then as an ally, I've been experiencing that through a lot of the work I've done, particularly with the American Astronomical Society Committee on Status Minorities in Astronomy, which is a very long word. And I think one of the things I think it's important to highlight that, and I know we'll get to talking a little bit about the details of allyship. My role in that community that committee is really to help and serve the folks who are really in charge of understanding the issues for astronomers of color. It's very easy, again, for someone who's a senior person in the field to say, well, I know how we're going to make this happen and do it effectively, and it will be successful, and et cetera. But what I've learned is that if I'm to be a true ally, I really need to be someone who is there to support and to listen and to act when actions need to be taken. And it's not my job to take charge and decide the frame of what this is going to look like. That's something I have to, I've learned the hard way. I've learned by doing the wrong things. But I now understand very clearly that as being an ally, you have to be someone who is ready to help and ready to, stand back and provide that support, but, really provide meaningful support and not try to take charge of the situation.
I would love to follow that up, Adam, when you're sharing about this mistake of sort of saying, I have all these answers and I want to be supportive and I want to be helpful, and so I'm going to share and really take up that space. I think that's definitely a trap that I think especially early on in my career I fell into. I think much of my role is to facilitate and to be in the spotlight and to be the person speaking up often, and it's incredibly difficult to peel that back, I think. And I think especially with given powers of structure internal to our hierarchy in higher education, but I think also structurally external from higher education. Just, I am a cisgender white woman, and I am always happy to take up that space without consciously even engaging with that. And so I think, one of the things that's been really important and was an eye-opening experience for me was really having some folks who had done their own personal work around their own bias and their own identity and unpacking their need to be in that helpful role, and really witness the white saviorism within me, and sort of going, well, I have all this power and I have all this positionality and I just want to help. But it really is a tenuous balance to be in that helpful position and not take on this role and centering self instead of centering the needs of the community we're trying to serve or trying to help. So I think that's a really, really important learning piece around allyship.
Yeah, I will say, just to jump in, you see it in the health system as well all the time, that, the reason most people go into healthcare is because we genuinely care about people and we want to take care of them. And so you really do have to find that balance of, I am not speaking for this group of people to whom I do not belong, but at the same time, I want to care for them and support them and do the best. What I find really difficult, and I think both of you have touched on it, is that when you don't have those folks represented, especially in positions of power. So in my circumstance, as physicians, as lead nurses, and other kind of directorial roles, those people who can say this is what certain communities need, then who is going to speak up, right? So you do have to find that balance of, I want to speak up and I write, but I also know that I cannot speak for. So there's that difference of, we need to help highlight what may end up being a disadvantage for certain groups, but we also really need to continuously go back to those groups and say, what can we do better?
I talked about this a little earlier, but my beginning with allyship began with gender impact. This is going back to the early 2000s. I moved out here from Illinois in the late 90s and then got a job at the library here for the next 15 or so years, starting about 2003. And blissfully unaware of my white privilege, male privilege, all of that sort of stuff. It was never, it wasn't a thing that you really talked about. I was a little bit different. I'm the first generation of immigrants from Ireland, and always felt we were always poor, poverty. That's where there's a little bit of understanding of kind of being different, but I can hide because of the white maleness. That's what kind of figured out, if I shut up and don't act like I'm poor or from another culture, then I could easily slide by. And that privilege helped me a ton, moving from the projects, getting to, a house and a family and all that sort of stuff. And then I moved into the library world, again, as a technology person, but in library. Library is one of the few professions, kind of like nursing and some others, that are female dominated. And I was looking around, and basically IT tends to be about 17 to 24% female. And then when we talk about tech and race later on, if you want to, it's way smaller, like 3-4%, something like that. So tech is mainly dominated by people who look like me. And then I came to the library and I wanted to have a tech thing that would help the library, and all the tech people in the library look like me. The library looked like the library, looked like, very heavily mixed of females and strong female leaders and that sort of stuff. And that's where they were my allies. It's where I was finally to learn, wait, there's a whole other world and way of thinking about people and how they work together. At the same time, we were working together as libraries across the country and across the world and doing conferences and doing a thing called IRC. It's kind of like an old version of Teams or Slack. And there were no women in there either, or there were very few. And I started looking at my language and the other language that was flowing through there and realizing it was a locker room. And we were basically, losing on the potential of all these people we could have been working with and ruining their careers, basically, because they saw there was no way to get through us to get to the good stuff. So that was really embarrassing and humbling. And so from then I worked on things. At first it was just writing a document for how to come to this conference, how to work within this IRC channel, how to talk to each other. Just a little bit, it was about don't be blue, think about how you might be affecting others, that sort of stuff. Over the years with Code for Lib and with other folks there, we worked with Frameshift Consulting and others to build codes of conduct. Remember, there's a time when that thing wasn't a thing. Conferences never had anything like that. You go to a Ruby conference as a female of 1-2%, and there was always bad stuff happening. So codes of conduct at these conferences, at our conferences and things like that, with rules and things. And there's whole ways of doing these things now. I got to be involved in that from the very beginning. So that's what I thought I could do, is use my loud voice and my noise to get these rules established, to make to raise the floor for people so they don't have to put up with a bunch of garbage, so that we can all get together and work together. So yeah, I'll stop there for now. What was the signal for me to shut up?
Yeah. You're fine, Declan. Kaylee, I liked your point in the chat, speaking up when it is uncomfortable, not just when it makes us feel good. And I feel like those awkward conversations are so important. Even though they're tough, you really need to bring those to light. And it's those tough conversations that make us learn and make us grow. Does anyone have anything else to add to that first point? I think we
Something
could.
Adam said, being an ally means being uncomfortable and being open to being uncomfortable. And there's also Kaylee referred, there's some pitfalls too, like the white knighting and things like that, and also trying to solve it all, trying to figure it all out. So it's a really weird line to walk, but it's a much safer line for me than for underrepresented folks.
Well, I think that's a good segue to, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but what's the best way for someone to serve as an ally in either their personal life and professional? Because those are sort of two different lives, but how does anyone want to touch on maybe how someone can be an ally professionally and maybe someone else could take personal, or who wants to take that question?
Well, I can say there's one commonality for both of those is self-education, right? So, I like to think of allyship as, you mentioned at the beginning that, anyone can be an ally. And I would say anyone can be a ballerina, and anyone can be president of the United States, and anyone can be, F1 plane flyer, whatever. But you can't just be one. You have to actually work at it, and you have to understand what it means to be an ally, and you have to know, what are the tools that are available, and how do we approach allyship. And so I think common to both personal and professional is really, doing the work first to understand, what are the issues in your profession and what are the issues in your personal sphere of influence that require allyship. And part of that is, there's a lot of resources online. One of the things you don't want to do is to go ask your Black friend, what is it like to be Black in physics? Because that's asking what one person is like to be in physics. There's lots written on this, and it's important to kind of take your time and do the work yourself. And again, that I think is a commonality to both of them. I think another commonality is a little bit, actually a lot of humility, because it is hard to do something like being an ally, like it's hard to be a professional ballerina. And you're going to fall. And it's important to, when you stumble or when you make a mistake, to own up to that mistake and learn from that. And owning up is actually really important for these kind of things. It is, it can feel terrible when you do something that doesn't work as an ally. It can feel like you've made things worse. And again, both personal and professional. But if you take ownership of that and you're honest about, understanding that, that you were unskillful, and you want to learn to do better, I have found that my colleagues are understanding of that, and they are more than happy to explain what could be better. But they appreciate when we are open and honest that we know we've made mistakes and we want to do better. So humility is a really important part of this too.
Yeah, I think just to look personally for a second, I'll let someone else take the professional one. I think one thing that all of us on this panel had talked about previously was we almost kind of hate labeling ourselves allies because it's really kind of giving ourselves a pat on the back for something that everybody should be doing anyway. And you brought your button. And it's really not about what you call yourself or where you stand. It's about your actions, and that comes back to that humility piece of, you just have to do that constant self-reflection to say, am I listening? Am I speaking more than I should be? Am I really engaging with communities, or am I happy to sit and read my book on white fragility? What is making me uncomfortable? Am I in a situation where I feel uncomfortable, and why is that? And really digging into that. I will say again, on a very personal note, I have 2 small children, and it was time for the older one to start attending school. And so my significant other and I really had to talk through, okay, what kind of school experience do we want for our kid? And here in San Diego, you have a lot of options, and a lot of people choose to send their kids to private schools or to charter schools because those are the good schools. And so again, you sort of peel those layers back. What does it mean to be a good school? Who is my kid going to be interacting with? What kind of life lessons are they going to learn? And, you know, we made the personal decision to send them to the local public school that is considered a Title I school that is, you know, not as well funded, maybe a little lower on the test score range. But we said, you know, it's our personal commitment to make sure that our kids grow up seeing not just white and Asian faces, that they see a lot of everyone, and maybe they feel a little uncomfortable growing up, because, you know, it's good to know what that feels like to be a minority in a situation. So it's having those tough decisions where you think maybe it's not what everybody else would do, maybe it's not what's considered the ideal version or what's going to get you ahead in life, but making those choices about what's going to be good for our community and not just ourselves.
I number one, share the small child decision-making process. It is tricky on all fronts. But what really spoke to me in what you're sharing is, you know, it's deeply personal, but it's that's the same decision-making process and vulnerability and humility that I think is really vital in the professional side of things as well. I think it's really easy to sort of say, in my personal life, it's just about me and my people, and you know that I have control over, that I have impact in, and it's for me what I've been sort of reflecting on as of late in my role in advancement, and sort of really unpacking those structural and personal layers of oppression, having that same conversation, and sort of calling in and calling out of those same themes and issues, I think is really vital to bring some human life into our work. I think it's so easy to just sort of say, this is the way it is, this is work, this is what we're doing. I don't have emotions, I don't have feelings, we don't have time for that, we have stuff to do. And we don't need to have this personal dialogue. Like this is, you know, we can save that for a day that is not busy, or for a process that that's not a priority, can't be a priority. And so I think there's really some intentionality that I think has been really important for me around just sort of sitting back and saying, why not? Like, why are these not the priorities in our business plan, and why can't they be? And how can I continue to use my power and my sphere of influence to continue to be the stick in the mud? And I think that's sort of where the sort of like allyship and like, we should just all be doing this coin sort of flips for me. It's this idea that like there was this huge awakening, and we all of us white folks wanted to read all the books and do all the work and have this, you know, this come to ourselves moment, and there's this need, I think, now around this allyship piece to sort of put our money where our mouth is, right? Like to make those choices for our children, to make those choices for our careers. Like, am I taking on a role that I could not, of leadership? Like, is there a role that I'm taking that is of leadership that could be done just as well by someone who's not given the opportunity? And it's really making hard choices, and putting yourself in kind of a uncomfortable position, knowing that like that's the least we can do. Like this is the least we can do to rectify the structures that we work within.
Declan, did you have anything to add to that?
If you wanted a couple more examples, I think from professional side, I look for the behavior I exhibited when I was a young person in other men, usually white men, and try to interrupt. In trying to get along with people so that I can interrupt without necessarily causing a nuclear event, but also make it clear that other voices need to be heard, and not just the dominant voice in the room. Same thing with, you know, meetings. It's just like when someone tries to get a word at Kelly earlier, you were trying to get in there. That's why I was staying back, because you were trying to get in, and then but I was going to go and see how you're doing. So it got like basically just giving a space for someone that I can just naturally just walk into because I'm old and white.
Declan, I know we kind of talked about the definition of allyship, and you kind of wanted to touch on allyship meaning lifting up those who have historically been marginalized or excluded due to race. Is that something you would touch on right now about the allyship definition and how you disagree with it?
Sure, if you like. The lifting up stuff is very offensive to me, and I imagine it would be offensive to someone who is listening to that too. We're all coming from who knows where. So I don't know, there's plenty of people who I would think I could walk down the street and lift up, who are probably in better shape than I am. So I much rather like the terminology of solidarity. And if you'll notice, a lot of the literature on allyship and our main speaker and a couple of the speakers today really wove in solidarity with allyship as well too, trying to take some of that patronistic sting out of it. And a lot of that terminology and stuff can lead to the white knighting and the kind of, yeah, it can cause issues. So, but it's better than nothing. It was a good place to start. I think it's evolving and making some sense, and I really like the way it's going. Anybody else have problems with the terminology?
Yeah, I do too.
100%, and you have used it already in this space. Like, language is super important, and like, hey, already messed it up today, like thank you, Declan. That is that really was
I get sick almost every time I open my mouth on this subject, and probably one time in this thing, I'll use the word normal, like, oh, but that's normal, or we'll come back to normal. And I've got this thing in my head that I don't even realize it. I'm being careful. I'm at a talk. I'm being careful at what I'm saying, but that just comes out. So it's good to go back, and I have to get on myself too and stay fresh with this.
Yeah, I think the keynote speaker today, I took some notes because so many of the things that he was saying really resonated with me, especially around language and what we choose to dance around when we talk about people and what we choose to call folks. And I have to sit with that for a while too, because so many of those words we use as well when we talk about health equity. We talk about the underprivileged, we talk about the underserved, and we really don't call things out the way we should. I go back to thinking about really calling out the systems that we have in place that were built to keep certain communities down and lift certain communities up. Again, apologies for using that terminology, but and then how do we approach them breaking those systems down? And we can't approach it just on an individual level. I can't, to use Declan's analogy, I can't just walk down the street and pick the first Latinx person I see and say, I am going to assist you, and therefore racism is over, right? So we really have to, again, work within our frameworks and use our own privileges, use our spheres of influence wherever we are to say, who is the system built for? Who is it serving and who is it not? And what can we do to change that?
Haley, I saw your point in the chat too. You said, I think we could also talk about the privilege of being able to mess up in the workplace. And I feel like a lot of times people are afraid to speak up because they think they may get fired or something might happen. This could even not just talk about allyship, it could be about any situation really. So that's another topic for another day.
Except I may push one point of that you said. Part of being, when I got into the lead fellowship, and then in the last couple of years to lead academy, they're having us do these race talks at our different departments. So we go try to influence the spaces that we're in. And one of the I did it about 30 times, and with 15 people at a time, working through a 500 person organization. And one of them, actually it turned out that the chat was really nice to have, because she wouldn't speak up. But she chatted private with me, said, I'm afraid I'm going to get fired if I talk about this. And then, so I didn't assign it to her, but I brought that up as an issue. Do people feel they might get fired for talking about race or being part of that? And half the room was, half the Zoom room was basically scared to talk. And I had to assure them, no, this is part of the university. This is part of what we do, open talk. Anyway, the whole thing, the whole race talk. But to hear that fear that they would be fired just for even thinking about this or bringing this up or talking about race with someone else at work.
Or not just fired, but like ostracized or seen as the other, or seen as the, you know, like the angry person in the room, or everybody's going to look to me now to be the only holder of equity, diversity, and inclusion because I'm the only person of color in the space, or because I am, you know, the only woman in the space. I'm the only mother, so I'm clearly the person who has all the information about being a parent, right? It's that sort of like, if I say anything, I allow for everything. When there's an identity that you hold that the majority doesn't, right? And so that's been a conversation I've had a lot with colleagues that are doing this work with me that hold those identities, and like how I can best support. And Declan, the way we go about it is a private chat, right? The way I go about being a co-conspirator in that space is, hey, noticing you're not speaking, can I bring something up for you? Hey, do you want me to shut up and give you space here? Hey, like what's happening? What's that dynamic? And like creating that structure prior to having a conversation with different power structures in the space for me has been a really great tool. And Zoom allows for that, right? Like in real life, that's not an option to be like, hey buds, I think I'm noticing some stuff. So that's been a real incredible tool, I think.
And I don't know if anyone in the chat here was able to attend Micah Pollock's conversation, but she talked about, is it easier to bring up something to somebody about allyship face-to-face, or would you like to go talk to that person separately behind closed doors? And a lot of people kind of had different points. They said, yeah, let's just address it right now head on. But there was a woman that said, hey, I'd rather go talk to this person separately. So it's, like you said, Kaylee, it's easier with Zoom now to kind of have those conversations. And I would also say that it's good to continue those conversations too, past Zoom. And then if like, let's keep talking about it and let's get through it.
Yeah, and Sean, I'll just throw in that, there isn't, there's no one key fits every situation, right? If it is something that's come up that needs to be addressed promptly and with the entire group, then as an ally, we really need to step in at that point. So there's kind of a range of things that can happen. And, Kaylee, I really like the sort of suggestions you made about how you can reach out, private message in Zoom with co-conspirators. And that's certainly one way to sort of approach some of those mechanics. And you may also have to do, you may have to actually say something publicly, and that you might get a lot of shade for doing that. And, I've experienced pretty negative responses from my colleagues in physics for, pointing out obviously terrible things. But I go back to what Kaylee said earlier. It's, this is what we should be doing if we want to change our communities to make it more just and more socially equal. And all I'm spending is the privilege that I didn't earn.
I do see a question in the chat here from Tamra. I can read it off, but she says, Bettina Love critiques allyship and instead calls for co-conspirators, which invokes action. She asks those with privilege to ask themselves, what am I willing to give up in order to advance justice? Or what am I willing to risk or lose? Does anyone have a thought of, or wants to take that?
I think that's just a really fantastic thing to think about. I think that really is what it comes down to for so many people is it is easy to make proclamations over your feelings and opinions, and it is difficult to come face to face with potentially losing your own luxuries or privileges. I think that's really what I feel like I saw immediately in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and when so many of those Black Lives Matter protests were happening, that, you know, so many people did awaken, and it was wonderful to see, but it was, you know, it was difficult for people to express more than just dismay, or to read a little, you know, to read something. And it didn't go much deeper than that for so many people. And a lot of those people have since gotten a lot quieter. So I've really been asking myself in preparation for this panel, you know, what is the difference between being someone who attempts to be an ally lifelong versus someone who can react when something really horrible happens and then go back to their privilege. I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I will say, I think some of that really comes in that, again, that constant self-reflection, that asking yourself, you know, why have you made the decisions that you've, again, had the privilege to make, and what can you do to ensure that other people have those same privileges to make those same decisions. I think sometimes it is really about taking a step back from maybe going in, you know, all in, and then burning yourself out, and really kind of asking yourself, okay, what are maybe the ways that I can embed some of this activism in my daily life, right? So maybe I don't always look for ways to call people out, but maybe I look for ways to connect with folks, to, you know, donate time, donate money, you know, and any of those things are still, you know, smaller actions, but they're worthy actions. I think it's important to be honest when you ask yourself these questions of what am I willing to give up, because you have to live with the consequences.
I think, Isla, to your point of what are you willing to give up, there's also, I think, real opportunity to get stuck, right? In the guilt of not giving up, or in the sort of, it's all too big, and it's all too much, and I'm just one person, and if I don't go to the march or do the thing or donate the money, you know, I'm not actually impacting that much with my personal action. And I think there's this idea, and I'm totally going to butcher that. It's a quote, but I'm going to butcher it and just say the idea anyways. It's the idea that, like, your first reaction is what you've been given, right? Like the external sort of like structural messaging, and your second is your own. And so to me, that, like, it allows for sort of moving through that stymie of oh, it's too much, or oh, I did that wrong, or oh, I feel horrible for thinking that or saying that or doing that, and letting that sort of be something I did or said or thought, and knowing that the second response, and that the what I do with it next is mine to own, and really focusing on that. And I think that for me is like one of the ways that I've moved past, and not perfectly, and you know, ebbs and flows, but I think have really sort of unpacked and leaned into what can I and what am I willing to do.
I guess if we're to talk about risk too, I don't know if there's some sports fans here in the chat and in the breakout session, but former NFL coach Brian Flores is risking his job and his future employment with the NFL to bring up discrimination within the hiring processes. And he's pretty much risking being blackballed from the NFL altogether. So if anyone's interested, I would search Brian Flores. He's ex-Dolphins coach, but he's saying that there's a lot of problems, and there's only one Black NFL coach in the whole entire league, and there's 32 teams, and he's saying there's a problem, and this needs to be addressed. So for someone to speak up like that, to lose his whole entire coaching career, is is pretty important, and I'm glad that he's speaking up for that. So if anyone's interested, I would search for Brian Flores and look into that. He just spoke up a couple of days ago about the NFL and how majority of the players are Black, and there's 31 white coaches. So there's definitely an issue and a problem there.
So I'll just point out Brian's Black. So, he is threatening his own, career to stand up for, racial issues. Where are the white coaches? Those are the allies. We need those white coaches to say, yes, we agree and we want change now. That's where we need allies.
Go. Camera. I was just typing that. Exactly. And I think they're even asking not just the coaches too, where's our high profile white players? Where's, them speaking up, Tom Brady, the faces of the NFL too. So definitely right there. Is there anything else that, okay, Sam Knight, and are those white coaches willing to compete on a level playing field? The ones holding the wallets. Is there, I guess, to just conclude the conversation, how can we continue the conversation? Is there any tools that you guys have come across that you've seen that works? Is it attending these conferences? Is it just getting together with your colleagues and talking more about allyship? What can people do if they feel inclined and they want to continue the conversation? I guess I don't want this to end at this conference. I want us to further and keep talking about what's going on.
I threw a link in the chat there from Frameshift Consulting. I mentioned them earlier. They had a different, they were the ADA initiative originally. They were the Women and Girls in Tech Foundation with more than that. And they basically do allies. The first allies workshop I ever went to was through them. And so I put that there. They're there. They have all of their content from the ADA initiative is all open source. So it's all PDFs, all the slides. You could actually give the talks from the stuff that's on this website that's free. Or you can have them come in and talk. I brought them in a couple times in library land. And then I've gone to the training myself separately for a couple times to get refreshers and things like that. But this is how I stay fresh, and I read a lot of this stuff, and I read a lot of it online as well.
So I wanted to actually, Tamara just put a question in there that's actually, I think, tangentially related, and I think it's an important one. And that how, when we feel overwhelming, or we feel resistance, or we feel even ostracized in work for the work that we do, how do we stay focused on this? And that's a tough one. And there are many times where I've had to just step away and recuperate, because whatever happened was very strong and hard to deal with. I think the key thing is, allies also need allies, in the sense that we need to work together. It's very hard to be a sole ally, particularly in an organization where there's such an asymmetry in the gender or racial or ability balance in that community. And so, all four of us are UC Lead Fellows. In addition to the training, it also provides us a community to work in, to bounce ideas off of, to find partners, to give things like the race talk that Declan was talking about. So in that, I think that's one of the things, to get to your question, Sean, is, how do we start finding a community of people who are willing to not only learn, but also act, is a great way to do this, because not only do you have the kind of accountability that brings, but you can learn off each other and you can grow off each other. As opposed to, what Kaylee was mentioned before, this, like, how do I do this on my own? It's too much, right? It's very hard to do this on your own. So find a community of allies, or found a community of allies.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that I think the biggest barrier to doing this work, the biggest thing that will burn you out, is if you feel alone. So you have to find your co-conspirators. You have to find your co-allies. And that can be difficult, especially, maybe if you're new in a position and you don't know everyone in the organization, or, maybe you've been there a long time and you kind of feel like you sort of know everyone and you know who's going to be a co-conspirator or not. But you have to put yourself out there to find those people, to have those conversations. One thing that I did, I was very fortunate in that someone else in my department, I happened to have a conversation with her one day when she said, I'm really passionate about community health. And I said, hey, I am too. And then the conversation went from there. And I've been fortunate to have a partner in a lot of the work we did. But one of the things I am most proud of professionally was that she and I put together a set of social justice forums for the health system. It began in June of 2020 when everyone, when people were trying to find ways to be active. And we said, this is something missing in the health system, just a place to gather and find your community where you can speak without fear, where you can learn from each other, where you can, just reflect and you don't have to feel so alone in your own isolated department. So if you are looking for something to do just to get started, I cannot recommend enough just having those conversations with people, and you'll be amazed at what ideas come out of it and how much easier it feels to do the work when you have someone else you can go to say, I'm having a really tough day. I can't believe that person said that awful thing, or just, are you okay? It's very, very valuable.
Kind of coming off of that, and sorry, okay.
There's a question in the chat around how and where and how to find that community of support. Michael, you and I can have a long, deep conversation about this. Michael and I are in the same department. But I wondered if, I just needed to bring that to the forefront for you.
Well, joining lead fellows, I mean, that's something that's hard to get in though. So I think knowing some of this way, I'm happy to help with someone's application, or if anybody wants to try that. Joining that committee, the Chancellor's Committee on the Status of Women, I got prompted by one of my library managers to maybe think that might be something I might look at. I was like, come on, I don't have the brain or the patience for that kind of stuff. And I got in there, and I didn't at first. But I also, I'm a computer person, right? So fix, I want to make everything just right. Sometimes just listening and soaking and being in it and feeling it, and God, it can be awful. So, but it can also lead to a lot of stuff. How do you energize or stay in it? Well, I hate every time I have to give the race talk. Like I've said, I've done it 30 some times. Thinking about giving it just makes me want to quit. 2 minutes into it or 4 minutes into it, I'm great. And 10 minutes into it, when the people are talking and going back and forth, and I've heard something new from a coworker that I had no idea they had that dimension at all, is just awesome. And then coming back later, and even the people who are quiet, kind of circling back and saying, how you doing, what's going on, and hearing that it mattered to them, that's why. So it's a constant though. I swear, the next one, even though I've done it many times, is going to be as scary to me as doing the first one.
Kaylee, I'll go. I was just going to say, Kaylee, I know you do have the, equity, diversity, and inclusion and advancement. That's specifically for our department, but the working committee. So if maybe that's something that other people could do is start to form these sort of working committees and meet once a month, every couple months. I just wanted to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, I mean, the structure we have in advancement has taken 2 full years to get off the ground. I will say it has not been quick and easy. And I am, much like Declan, here's a problem. I would like to provide a solution, and let's get the ball rolling and let's really solve some issues. And I think, this has been a real practice in pausing and understanding that it is cyclical, and that we are in a giant bureaucracy, and slow and steady wins this race, really and truly. The structure we have in advancement is there's a project manager group, which I'm a part of, and then That feeds into a steering committee, and there's representatives from all over advancement. Every space is represented. And then there's working groups that are focused on different areas that came from an evaluation that we did. If anyone's interested in learning more about it, I could talk for hours about it. But I think the thing that I wanted to speak to is that there is this piece of like, we have to keep going. We have to keep going. And I think finding your people is really important, but also finding people who maybe have completely different goals, viewpoints. I mean, the thing that really has helped me sort of reevaluate and be more engaged in just this advancement process is opening up that group of humans, right? Like we started with 5 people that were lead fellows. And I was like, I got to start somewhere. These are the folks that I know are already interested. And it has taken a really long time to get our blinders off to sort of say, this needs to be a larger conversation. And even in our structures, it needs to be more equitable, and it needs to be more diverse, and it needs to be more of a community effort. And I think it's really easy to mirror the hierarchy and the oppressive structures that we are engaged in. And I think continuously sort of peeling that back. For me, that is that's the feel good work. Like to know at the end of the day, like this is a community that like we can have those honest conversations that are difficult, and that really I think it's finding the thing that keeps you going, right? Like it's maybe finding your people, but it's also finding the thing in this work that is like that's what keeps me motivated. Not just necessarily your folks, because your folks may change, to be very honest, especially in a professional setting, right? Your folks might change, but if you're rooted in I'm continuing this process because of this goal or this piece that I hold on to that really pushes me forward, like that's been the difference, I think, for me in this process. There's been lots of other processes, so.
Well, it looks like we're bumping up on 4 o'clock here. And if no one else has any more questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much to you, Kaylee, Adam, Declan, Ayelet. This has been a really great conversation. And I hope everyone that was here really enjoyed this exploration of our perspectives on allyship. And I hope we have another fun rest of the day / day 2 tomorrow. So I hope everyone that's here still joins tomorrow as well. But thank you to you for being here, and let's continue the conversations and have those hard conversations and build those committees and keep talking about this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.